Now, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Please raise your hands. Okay. I'll continue. Now, in 1958, there was an Indian scholar named Jaini, Padmanabha S. Jaini. And what he says is that the treasure of Abhidharma and the lamp of Adharma, he was researching these two texts, the Treasury of Abhidharma and the Lamp of Abhidharma. So in talking about the treasury of Abhidharma takes the positions of the Foundation's Vehicle Sutra school. So in one respect, the treasury of Abhidharma takes the foundational positions, and in the other respects, it takes the Mahayana view. Now, in the treatise called The Lamp of Abhidharma, there are some refutations of the treasury of Abhidharma. Then, in addition to that, the author of the treasury, which is in Sanskrit, is called the Koshakara. This means the author of the treasury of Abhidharma. Much of the text within the treasury of Abhidharma is very similar to two different texts. One is called the Vetulika Shastra. If we translate this into Tibetan, I can't really exactly say what it would be in Tibetan, but it is the name of a text. My video got lost. It's the name of a text. And there's another term for another name for the text. In any case, the text of the treasury is very similar. The text is very similar to the Vetulika Shastra. So there are many similarities between the treasury of Abhidharma and the Vetulika Shastra. So that is one point. Because there are so many similarities, one reason why the Lamp of the Abhidharma refutes or raises objections to the treasury of the Abhidharma is because there are so many points that are taken from this Vetulika Shastra. Now, a third point. The text from the Vetulika Shastra uses many words that are very similar to the Mahayana, It gives many similar proofs as the Mahayana. And so the basic summary of all of this is that the teachings on the two truths and so forth within the tradition, within the treasury of Abhidharma, are very similar to the presentation of the three characteristics. It's like he's taking the presentation of the three characteristics as the basis. So that is one summary that he made. No, so this What Frau Wanner, the scholar Frau Wanner, said is that the author of the Treasury of Dharma was a later Vasubandhu, a Vasubandhu who had not entered the Mahayana. So it was a Vasubandhu who had not developed the Mahayana view. So that's what Frau Wanner says. But what the refutation that Jaini makes of that is that in the Treasury of Abhidharma, there are many passages that show a Mahayana orientation. And there's also this presentation of the three characteristics. So it is not correct to say that the author of the Treasury of Abhidharma did not have a Mahayana orientation. Now, another point. He also gave many bits of evidence that the author of the Treasury had a Mahayana vow, because the scholar Frau Wanner used as his primary bit of evidence for saying there are two earlier and later Vasubandhus, is because he thought that the author of the Treasury did not have a Mahayana view. He did not teach the Mahayana teachings, and therefore the author of the Mahayana treatise, in particular the Yogacarya, the text treatises of the Yogacarya in the mind only, was a different Vasubandhu. They could not have been the same as the author of the Treasury of the Abhidharma. Now Jaini refuted this, saying that it could not. Now, in the 1980s, there are three Japanese scholars, and I don't need to mention their name. And so they continued their own research, and they took they continued and also supported the position by the Indian scholar Jaini. So this Indian scholar Jaini said that if we look at the text itself and examine its text, if we look at the work itself and examine the text, then we can see that the Treasury of Abhidharma, from the Treasury of the text, we can see that it's not okay to say that there must have been an earlier and later Vasubandhu. And so this is a very influential proof that he had. And it's a very powerful proof that he gave. Then in the second scholar was the scholar named Lambert and Schmidhausen. So Schmidhausen is a German academic. And in 1967, what he said is that when we need to have these two criteria for judging. When you talk about Vasubandhu, if we're going to decide who Vasubandhu was and what his view was, and when we were researching Vasubandhu, there are two methods or two logics that we can use. And he used these two criteria for determining whether it was Vasubandhu or not. And the first is the idea of the Sutra school of a single stream of consciousness. Now, this is a term that he himself came up with and applied to it. So in German, it's ein einschichtiger Erkenntnisstrom. So it's German, and I can't read German. So basically, the Sutra school's position of the single stream of consciousness, and then there's another criteria: is the Yogacarya association of the complex of streams of consciousness. And so this is der Erkenntnisstromkomplex des Yogacarens. So now German is very difficult, and I don't know it well. But it is a Yogacarya assertion of a complex of streams of consciousness. So there's basically two different views. So these are like two different criteria in the site. So the sutra is going to talk about the sutra single single stream of consciousness, saying that you say the mind, intellect, and consciousness are all the same. This is a position of the sutra school. When you talk about the Yogacara assertion of the complex of streams of consciousness. So what this is talking about is we use the word chitta, that in mind, that refers primarily to the grounded. The manas or intellect refers primarily to the afflicted mind, and consciousness or vijnana applies to the six consciousnesses. And that is the Yogacara position. So using these two different criteria and these methods as a way to research. So using these two criteria to analyze and research, he reanalyzed the text of the treasury, the proof of karma, the 20 verses, and the 30 verses. And as he did his research, his final conclusion that all of these texts, the treasury, the proof of karma, the 20 verses, and the 30 vows, that all of these texts were really very clearly conformed to the Sutra school's position of a single layer, a single stream of consciousness. And so for this reason, he said that they must have all been written by a single author. So that was his conclusion. Now, his investigation was very detailed, and we don't have time to talk about it. And so we don't need to go in it now. But to give a basic presentation, or a basic overview of it now, the way we can explain it simply, so when to talk about the Sutra school presentation of a single layer stream of consciousness, how does it come out in this? So how does we say that how do they use this idea of the Sutra school single layer stream of consciousness presentation as proof that they're all written by the same author? If you look at the order of the stages of these texts, and so in terms of the order, he said the first is the proof of karma, and what is discussed in there, that teaches the ground consciousness. That is probably the first text, the first work that gives the presentation of the ground consciousness. The next is the 20 verses. And within the 20 verses, there's the mind, which in the Sanskrit is chitta. Then there's manas, which is like intellect. And then there is vijnana, which is consciousness of vijnana. It says that these three are synonymous. Not only are they said to be synonymous, he uses the particular mind-only jargon, or the mind-only term. He talks about the term, the vigyapti matrata, so the mind-only present, the mind-onliness. Now, in the 30 verses, when we take a look at that, Vasubandu uses the word chitta primarily for the ground consciousness. So chitta is primarily for the ground consciousness, and manas is primarily for the afflicted mind, and vijnana is understood as the sixth mental consciousness. And so he uses these as the basis for teaching the awareness-only positions. So when we take a look at these texts, first you have the position of the ground conscious, then you have the position about the synonym, the nature of the mind, intellect, and conscious being synonymous, and at the same time asserting the mind-only view. And then even more subtle than that, in the 30 verses, the mind referring to the ground consciousness, intellect referring to the afflicted mind, and so forth. And so these occurred in a sequence, and so for that reason, and when we look at Vasubandu's works, we see the differences, the changes that occurred, the developments that occurred in his thought, and how the Yogacarya view became clearer. So when Schmidhausen looked at the actual text, comparing the actual text of these works, and using these new proofs or this new criteria, Schmidhausen concluded that the treasury, the proof of karma, the 20 verses and the 30 verses were all written by a single person, and said that the author was the author of the treasury. And so this is his summary. Actually, one strange thing we have to understand, something very strange about this situation, is that this scholar, Schmidhausen, when he was doing his research, his original aim there was Frau Wallner who asserted that there are two Vasubandhus, and so he wanted to support that tradition, and that was his original aim. But as he was doing his research, in the end, the conclusion that came out, the conclusion was that it's not correct to say that there are two Vasubandhus, that there were not an earlier and later, that there is a one. The author of the treasure, the author of the Yogacarya and Mind-only treatises were all one person. And so his original intention and his conclusion were different. In any case, his logic refuting that there were an earlier and later Vasubandhu was very powerful, and so that was that. And so for that reason, Schmidhausen's new logic Schmidhausen used a new logic excuse me, once Schmidhausen used this new logic, it entered a new era of scholarship. And the reason why this is a groundbreaking method is that we've talked about is instead of relying on traditional accounts, instead he looked at the actual text and structure of this. And in this way, he began a new method of research. This was like a new stage of research or a new historical stage. And in addition, many of the people who engage in research into the Yogacarya school primarily uses their method examining the structure and the text of the various works. Now there's a question that comes up here. When we talk about Schmidhausen, the result of Schmidhausen's research was that these texts, the proof of karma, the 20 verses and the 30 verses, were taken from the idea of the Sutra school of the single layer stream of consciousness. So they're very similar to that. So they took that as the basis and then developed that. And so when we speak about that, in order to understand that, we need to figure out who are the Dodepa? What is the Sutra school? Was there actually a Sutra school or not? And if there was one, then what sort of a school was it? What was it like? So this is the question that comes up. And regarding this question, the person who gave a very good answer to this was a Japanese scholar who gave a good answer to this question. And the name of this Japanese scholar was That's Kato Junjo. Kato Junsho. Now, what this Kato Junjo said in a 1989 publication, after he did research into the treasury and a text called the Jnanaya Sarani, the Sutra on Entering Logic, and when he researched these texts, and as he examined these texts, in the end, his conclusion. So he spent a long time doing his research, and the ultimate conclusion was that the Sutra school or the Santra school first appeared in the treasury of Abhidharma. So it originated from the treasury of Abhidharma. Usually, so this first appeared in the term Sutra school comes from the treasury of Abhidharma, and before that, there was a master, Sri Labdha. There was a position that had been started by a master called Sri Labdha. But instead, differently from that, what he said is that the Sutra school, the word Satantra, first comes from the treasury of Abhidharma. And before the treasury of Abhidharma, there was no term for the Sutra school. And so what this shows is that there's the author of the treasury. The author of the treasury, so the Vasubandu, who was the author of the treasury, was not only well-versed in the foundation view, but he was also very highly trained in the mind-only, the Yogacara view. Not only that, there's a lot about the Sutra school in the Abhidharma, and most of these talks show that they're actually very close to the Yogacara views. Now, then later, there were two scholars. There was a Japanese scholar. What's his name? This is his name. There's a Japanese, as he continued to research, the situation became very common. Now, this Japanese scholar's name is Sakuma Hidenori. So Sakuma Hidenori in the 1990s wrote a publication. And what he said is that the positions that are found in the treasury, most of these positions actually can be found in the Yogacara levels. So you can find these positions in the Yogacara Bhumi, the Yogacara levels text. So within the treasury of Abhidharma, there are many different positions of the Sutra school that are taught, and what these are is that Vasubandhu, when he was taking the Yogacara position, when he was speaking about this, he primarily took the Yogacara position to make his refutations of the Sarvastivada. And it's a way that talking about the Sutra school was a way that he used to speak to the Sarvastivada school. For example, if you speak to someone who speaks English, you can't speak to them in Tibetan. They won't understand. So for the same reason, when you talk to the Sarvastivada, when you take the mind-only school and speak to them, they're the Yogacara terms and the Yogacara view. And if you only take those as a basis when you speak to them, then they will not understand what you're saying. And it's because we have to talk about everyone has to have like a common perception, because there's no common perception between the people. In order to give things that people commonly accept, then you had to speak in ways that other people can accept. And so for that reason, Vasubandhu, when Vasubandhu spoke to the Great Exhibition from the angle of the Vajrayana, he used these sutra school positions to speak to them. There are also sutra school positions in the 20 verses, and what these are is that there is someone who is objecting, so that there are many outer and internal schools who object to the position of everything by being mind only, and so he takes the position of a sutra school in order to make it a rejection. So the positions of the sutra school presented in the treasury and the positions of the sutra school presented in the 20 verses, and both of these are ways to give good explanations of Yogacarya positions to other people. And they're and he used them as a way to debate with people who did not accept the mind-only Yogacarya position. So it's a way of speaking, a way of addressing others. So when we look at that, is that the Sutra school of view was in order to have a common language when it was a way that the Yogacarya masters used to have a common language when speaking with people of other schools. Now, as I've mentioned, the Yogacarya is a practice that was primarily was a school that primarily emphasized practice. And so the aim and the purpose of the school was actually different than other schools. And so when they're having debates with other schools, then either you have to have a similar perceptions, or you have to have you're talking about them in the same stage, in the same arena. Then everyone has to have, if you only talk from your own particular ideas, then the other people will not really understand it well. Or the discussion will not be clear and easily understandable. And so in order to speak in a way that fit with the general way that things understand in the world, and so for this reason, they developed the Sutra school. To give an example of this, in the chair of the practice siddhas, the text by 8th Karmapa Mikyo Dorje, when speaking about the borders between holding different views. What he says at this point is that there are two ways you can give an answer. You can give, there's one way is to give the particular answers that are given in the 8th Karmapa's chair to the practitioners, or there is another way of giving an answer in a way that accords with other people's views. And when you give the answer according to our own particular interests, in actuality, is closer to the view expressed in Mikyo Dorje's chair to the practice cities. However, but when you're debating with other schools, for example, if we are holding as our position the views presented in 8th Karmapa's chair to the practice cities, so when you have the opponents or the other schools, the Sakya, Geluk, and so forth, the person from the other school will not clearly understand that the terms and the differentiations given our own particular school. And so if you don't have a general way of or a way of presenting things so that then the other people won't understand it. Because if you say one thing, then the other person won't understand. So if you say that this is the East, the other understand person is in the West, then the people won't understand. As an example, you say, is there a monastery? You say, why? They didn't know. And so if you engage in debate about whether there's a monastery or not, and if you don't have any positions, and so and basically you have to give the answer that I have no assertions. That's the particular response. Then if you say, then people will say, but actually your assertion is that you have no assertions. But if you talk about this, the other person can't say then. And so like people just want to understand what you're saying. It's like there's no understanding between the people speakers. So you have to have a common way of speaking, a common language, a common way of a common manner of speaking. And so it's similar to that. That's a similar understanding that comes up here when it's discussing how the Sutra school originated. When the mind-only Yogacara were speaking about the Sarvastivada and Yogacara positions are just completely different, and the way they speak about things is different. And so in order to have a common language and common perception when speaking about them, then if you speak from the perspective of the Sutra school, then not only is it something that the other person will be able to accept and will accept more easily, but it's that they'll be able to understand it more easily, so you'll be able to have real communication and convince them. Now, so earlier we spoke about Schmidthaus and concluded that Vasubandu was the author of the Treasury, the proof of Karma, the 20 verses in the 30th sentence, and he gave the proof that they're all written by a single author. And then in the 80s, there was a Japanese scholar. Now, this Japanese scholar's name is this Japanese scholar is Matsuda Kazunoba. And so what he said is, so he, in addition to the works that Schmidthausen exerted, he added 2 additional works. And these 2 additional works, and what they were, first is the logic of explanations, and the action was the explanation of interdependence. And so he said that these were also written by the Vasubandhu, the author of the Treasury. So the order of this that he put, when he did as similarly to Schmidthausen, and according to Schmidthausen's results, he arranged the order of the writing the text. So first he said that the logic of explanations, then the proof of karma, and then the explanation of interdependence, then the 20 verses, and then the 30 verses. And he said that the author of this, the Koshakara, the author of the Treasury, Vasubandhu, was the author of all of these. And so he came up with this position, and these days, most academics accept this research. And this is another important point. Now, in addition, there was a Japanese scholar. There's the same one, Matsuda Kazunoba. There's a Matsuda Kazunobu, and then in addition, there is also Hakamaya Noriaki. So these 2, when they're researching the Abhidharma, the Treasury of Abhidharma, within the Treasury, there's the term Purvacharya. And this Purvacharya appears 11 times. And what it means is the past teacher, the master of the past. And the master of the past is actually a work that's connected with the Yogacarya view in school. It's a term connected to the Yogacarya school. And in particular, the Japanese scholar This Japanese scholar Hakamaya Noriaki, the way he summarized this is that this word, Purvacharya, the master of the past, is in the Yogacara an honorific term used for masters for whom we have great faith and conviction. Like the same way we talk about the Kaju forefathers or the masters of the past. So when you talk about the Purvacharya, is like a way of expressing great respect for the earlier great masters of the Yogacara school. So it is a word used as an honorific. And so for that reason, there is a commentary on the treasury by Yashomitra. And so in that, he writes that the Asanga is the Purvacharya, the earlier master. And so thus we can insert that among the different compilers of the Yogacara was a Sangha. There was one of these. And that it was also included as held in very high esteem by the Yogacara school. But as whether to see whether that Asanga, whether that actually was the Asanga, an individual who was an elder brother of Vasubandu, it's difficult to say that for certain. However, we knew that there is a master named Asanga, and it is very considered and very important in the Yogacara tradition. We can pretty much say this. So now traditionally when we talk about Asamgan, when we speak about Asambanga and Vasubandhu, we say that they're brothers. One is the elder and one is the younger brother. We have a tradition of saying this. So what is this? So does this mean that they necessarily had a family connection? It's difficult to say that. And people are still investigating this. But if we think about it in another direction, in another example, sometimes when we talk about brothers, doesn't necessarily mean to have a familiar connection of familial blood. Sometimes it can be like talking about masters and students who are very close, feel very close in mind. And maybe if you think about that, in that way, it's less complicated. To give like an example of this, we often talk about the three Kadampa brothers, Potawa, and the other. And so we always think that they're actually, when I was young, I thought that they're all in the same family. But actually, when you think about it, the three Kadampa brothers are not all the same family. But because they had very strong connection as friends, they became like real brothers, and even stronger than real brothers. They had such great love and such feelings of affection for each other. And so for that reason, they're called the brothers. And so it's similar here. Perhaps Asanga and Vasubandu, when we say that they're brothers, is show that either that they have a really close connection as master and student, or as being friends. And then the name brothers was given to them later by their students. And so to conclude, one thing I'd like to explain to all of you is, when we think about there are many works that were written by Vasubandhu, as I mentioned before. So which of these works are connected to the mind only? There's the 20 verses, the 30 verses, the proof of karma, the 5 aggregates, the 100 gates of dharma, the treatise on the Buddha family, and then commentaries on the ornament of Mahayana Sutras, distinguishing the middle from extremes, and the compendium of the Mahayana. Now, I didn't explain this clearly when talking about the compendium of Mahayana. I didn't explain it. When you talk about there's the verses of the compendium of Mahayana. This is not the commentary. This is the root text. In this root text, I said there are 4 different, and there are 3 translations in Chinese and 1 in Tibetan. So in total, there are 4 translations of the compendium of Mahayana. Now, among them, among these works of Vasubandu, there are the 20 verses and the 30 verses. And then the 30 verses you all know because it's the topic of our teaching. The proof of karma is in Tibetan. There's probably also is also in Sanskrit. The 5 aggregates is in Tibetan. The 100 gates of Dharma is also in Tibetan. And this is a text that's very important in Chinese. And when you begin to study the mind-only view, you study a text called as a preliminaries, you recite a text this text that Vasubandu's work called The 100 Gates of Dharma. This is the first act, as well as the text by Xuanzang, the 8 verses delineating consciousnesses. This is shows the delineations of the 8 consciousnesses. And so there's a tradition is to begin by studying with these texts, the 100 Gates of Dharma by Vasubandu and the 8 verses of delineating consciousness. Now there's the 8 verses delineating the consciousness I've translated in Tibetan, but I am not really happy with it. And so I'm a little bit shy to show it to you. Now, if it turns out well, then I will show it to all of you. So the treatise of the 100 Gates of the Dharma is in the Tibetan Tengyur, and the one that is in the Tengyur was translated from the Chinese. Now the 6th is a special one. It's the treatise on the Buddha family, and what this is, it's a commentary on the Sublime Continuum. The commentary on 3 of the chapters, not the only one, not the entire. Now, this is also debate whether this is written by Vasubandu or not, but this treatise on the Buddha family, later when we're speaking about the topic of the Sublime Continuum, is a text that we have to pay particular attention to, that we'll need to consider. And I also thought I ought to speak about this. This is related to it. Anyways, to mark the treasury of Abhidharma, I've spoken about it quite a bit. I said that the connection between the treasury of Abhidharma and the mind only. I've spoken of quite a bit about that, right? In the old days in Japan, when they were studying the mind only, the first thing they would study would be the treasury of Abhidharma. They would spend 8 years studying the treasury of Abhidharma, and then after that, they would spend 2 or 3 years studying the mind only. So this is what they say. So they considered the treasury of Abhidharma to be extremely important. And the master of the past must definitely have known that there is a connection between the two. So in brief, what really distinguishes Vasubandhu is that first he studied the text of the foundation vehicle, then he entered the Mahayana and studied the text, and he added profound explanations to the works of Maitreya and Asanga. And he took what was different from earlier ideas, and he compiled them all, and then he used his own particular thought and his own incredible intelligence to compile them. So this is Vasubandhu. Had a very great influence and kindness towards Buddhism in general, and particularly for the mind-only school. Now, Vasubandhu was so had studied the texts very, very easily, and he had such great intelligence that he naturally had a great ability to compile and organize and make a structure. He'd be able to take many different texts and bring them together. So he was very skilled and had a great capacity to do so. So there are many different positions, especially those from the period of schools, many different presentations of different schools and positions, and he would take all these different positions and compile them all, and he did quite a bit of work in this area. And among them, there are the 20 verses and the 30 verses are like the extremely important texts of the mind only. Generally, in the way uh, in the way it's described by Chinese masters, the 20 verses is used to refute their opponents, and the 30 verses to prove their own position. So in the 20 verses, he used really powerful reason to refute the realists, those who assert that there are real external objects, refuting everyone who do not hold that all phenomena are mind. So it's basically a treatise to refute. And then later, in the 20 verses, there is the root text by Vasubandu and a commentary by Vasubandu. Now, in the latter part of his life, the last text that he wrote was the 30 verses of the mind only. Now, the 30 verses, in addition to the previous presentations of the mind only, he added his own particular thought. Now, it's only 30 verses long, but the entire mind-only philosophy is taught really well in that short text. And so this is one of the works from the latter works of Vasubandhu, a very important work of Vasubandhu. But it is a later work. And soon after he wrote it, he passed away. And so for that reason, he did not write his own auto-commentary on this. But later, many Yogacara masters made mind-only explanations. And now, among them, there are 10 different authors of commentaries on it. And so, since they're because they're the 10 masters who each wrote their own commentaries, so they're called the 10 authors of the commentaries. In any case, the text by Vasubandhu that gives an autonomous presentation of the mind-only philosophy is this 30 verses. Now, later in China, there are many, there's a great Unshan, who is a modern master and a great scholar, and what he says, I mean, take the Vasubandhu really emphasized the view that there are no extra objects, only mind. And so he emphasized its point that there are no external objects. And so for that reason, the mind was given this widely known name of mind only. And the reason it was given this name is because Vasubandhu emphasized so strongly the idea that everything is awareness, everything is mind, that it was given the name mind only. And so in addition to that, it also became a school that was comparable to the Middle Way school. Now, at that time, the Middle Way school was a very widespread. And then the mind only then spread also, and it became a philosophical school that is able to hold its own against the Middle Way. And so when you talk about the Mahayana, the primary schools, we talk about one is the Middle Way and one is the mind only. So when you say the mind only, the primary reason why there was such a complete presentation was because of Vasubandhu appearing, and in particular to his view that there are no external objects, that objects do not truly, and his view that everything is only awareness. And so it's because of the emphasis. So that's, I think, all there is for today. That's all I have to say. So now we will recite the dedication prayers.
Jai